Chugga, 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 chugga. Defense today. Let's go. Back to another episode of Lombardi Time Brews. I am John Delray, your host. Today is day 2 of this podcast, and today we are covering the initial roster projection for that initial 53-man roster. Today, just a bit of news before we dive into the topic. The Packers did release down to get down to the 80 cutoff that the NFL mandated for this afternoon. Today they released with an injury designation Vernon Scott. They traded Cole Van Lannon to the Jaguars, and they placed Kylan Hill on the PUP for the regular season, meaning he is going to be out at least the first 4 weeks of the regular season. Vernon Scott was a little bit of a surprise, and I'll get into that as I get to the safety portion of the video later on. But those are the moves that the Packers made today to get down to the initial roster at 80. So, one other just housekeeping item as we keep going, one other logistic for you. If you like what you hear today, please hit subscribe, hit like, share it with your friends. Put it out on your Facebook page. Just see what happens. Let's just see if more people like it. And let's try to build a brand new Packer community. So today's topic, getting down. How are the Packers going to make their way from 80 down to 53 now? Yesterday I covered the offensive side of the ball. Happy to say that after 24 hours, my projections are still good. Cole Van Lannon, I said he wasn't going to make it. Today he was traded to the Jaguars. Anything that I've read so far about that trade said that it was for an undisclosed draft pick. Frankly, the Packers getting anything for him was a really good move. So nice work by Gutekunst and team there to at least find a home for Cole Van Lannon and get something in return. In addition to that, Kylan Hill going on PUP, I think a lot of people expected this. Absolutely what I called yesterday with the 4 running backs. So very happy. The prediction has lasted 24 hours. Now, let's see with the defensive side of the ball, if we can keep that going. So, first up on the defensive side of the ball, this is going to be the defensive line. I'm calling only 5, which is a little break from history. In the 3 years that LaFleur has run the team, 2019 they kept 6, 2020 they kept only 5, and then 2021 they again kept 6. I think this is another year for 5. I think we've seen historically, and I mentioned this yesterday, that the Packers, if they feel uncertain about depth at a certain position, sometimes they just kind of throw bodies at it to see what sticks. Or like the wide receivers, I think, are going to be this year just a complete puzzle altogether. The defensive line this year is strong. It is more stacked of a defensive line than we've seen in recent history for the Packers. And I think that's going to help them get away with just having 5, especially when you factor in that both Rashawn Gary and Preston Smith, depending on the defensive calls, can line up with their hand on the ground. Not often, but it still can be done, especially Rashawn. I really think that can allow them to get away with 5 defensive linemen. Pair that with 2 of the people that I think are going to get released, I think are really likely to make it through waivers, get to the practice squad, and then we could see them be practice squad elevations throughout the course of the season, really kind of build in that depth. Gutekunst has talked repeatedly about this initial 53-man roster isn't the complete picture of the roster, because now you have a 16-person practice squad. So really you're looking at trying to build the best 69. And I think defensive line is one of the places where they can get away with some practice squad stashes to keep the actual 53 a little lighter at this spot. So for the 5, I think we're going to see TJ Slayton, Jerron Reed, Kenny Clark, Devontae Wyatt, and Dean Lowry each make it. On the flip side, that means that your cut list is Chris Slayton, Jack Heflin, their 7th-round pick Jonathan Ford, and then Akil Byers. Ford being a 7th-round pick just hasn't done enough to really crack this rotation yet. Chris Slayton and Jack Heflin both seem to be well ahead of him, and I believe that Slayton and Heflin are two excellent candidates to go on to the practice squad. Slayton and Heflin both, they have played a ton of snaps this preseason as the Packers have rested so many of their original starters. And they've done the work to try to get onto this roster. But like I said earlier, I think this is one spot that they can maneuver some guys to the practice squad to keep their roster at 53. And I think that that's going to be Slayton and Heflin. Ford potentially too with the 16-man practice squad. You never know. But Slayton and Heflin seem to have the leg up in that way right now. And Byers, I think Byers all along has been more so just a camp set of legs and arms. Just camp guy. He hasn't done enough to really crack much of anything. So I think this is what we got. 5 defensive linemen: Slayton, Reed, Lowry, Clark, Wyatt. Then leaving off Chris Slayton, Jack Heflin, Jonathan Ford, and Ikeo Byers. Next up, the easiest in my opinion of the defensive positions to really get the final guess for: inside linebacker. I have 4 people ultimately making the final roster. That's going to be Quay Walker, Devondre Campbell, Chris Barnes, and Isaiah McDuffie. That ultimately leaves as the releases Ray Wilborn and Ty Summers. Before going farther, I got to say with Ty Summers, for being a 4th-year vet, it's really interesting how quiet his camp has been. And I'm not sure this is in the quiet yet solid kind of way, but just downright quiet. I've seen very, very little reported about him, even on a special teams front, which always seemed to be his thing. Last year, he played special teams a ton. He was one of their stalwarts. He did get a number of defensive snaps this last year, but then nothing in camp. For being a 4th-year vet on the same team, nothing. So ultimately, I don't think he's going to make the roster. I think this is an easy call. I think they go with 4 inside linebackers. And Devondre Campbell, your all-pro. Quay Walker, the first-round pick, who is going to add a lot of new wrinkles to the defense that I don't think Packer fans have seen before. And I don't mean that from a schematic standpoint, but I mean in the way of you finally have an inside linebacker who has the speed to go sideline to sideline. That could necessitate or bring down the necessity, I guess I should say, of having to call the dime package a lot and having to put on a third safety. In addition, Quay in minicamp was even taking some edge snaps. Now, I think that's more an experimentation, but again, it could help out the depth at edge. So Quay Walker, in his versatility, because he's such a physical specimen, is going to help other positions on this Packer defense. And then that leaves you with depth of Chris Barnes, who frankly has done nothing wrong, but just continued to find himself farther down the depth chart. He was a competent starter last year. Him as ILB 3, potentially 4, depending on how the roles shake out, is a massive depth upgrade for the Packers. And then you've got Isaiah McDuffie, who's made excellent progress over the course of this training camp. Originally, when he was picked last year, it was just kind of like, this is a special teams guy. Maybe he'll develop into an okay middle linebacker. But he's shown excellent progress throughout camp. He still will be a special teams stalwart for them. But throughout the 2 preseason games especially, he's shown that he can be that commander in the middle of the defense for the depth squads. Ultimately, a very, very strong group, something that we are not used to, and ultimately could help to change this defense. And I think the inside linebackers are going to have a very large say as to whether this winds up being a top 5 defense or not. Inside linebackers are up next, and, very different than its counterpart, inside linebacker. Outside linebacker is not at all an easy position to distinguish right now. I think you've got Rashawn Gary, Preston Smith. Obviously, those are your 2 bookends, your 2 stalwarts that the whole position is built around. Rashawn Gary absolutely has potential this year to be not just a Pro Bowler. We're talking all-pro. He has even gotten buzz for Defensive Player of the Year. So, Rashawn is ready to take over. And I am very, very excited for everything that comes with that. Then you've got Preston Smith. But beyond that is where it really starts to get dicey. Rookie JJ Ngabare has had a great couple of weeks of camp over the last couple. He started slow, But then it seemed like once we got to the game, something just clicked. And now he's kept that going in practices, really displaying his full arsenal of moves. I got to tell you, the pass rush that he had, I believe it was the Saints game, where he did like this ghost move that just juked the offensive tackle right out of his ankles. Awesome stuff. I think he has a lot of potential as a pass rusher. However, is he ready to truly be the number 3 outside linebacker? Unknown at this time, so they better have some level of experience there to go with it. So that's why I think JJ definitely makes it, but then you keep Jonathan Garvin. Garvin's only 23 years old. He was picked up as a developmental prospect. He has great physical tools. He did some nice things last year. He's not Preston Smith. He's not Rashawn Gary. Maybe he could be someday. Maybe. But he's definitely not there now. And the drop-off is substantial. With that being said, he was still one of the more productive of the puzzle pieces that you tried to put in depth last year. I think he makes it again this year. And then that last spot, I do think they keep 5 outside linebackers. But the 5th one is a big question. And right now, I have to give the nod to Tipa. Tipa, sorry, I always seem to mess that one up. I'm not sure how he fits in much. He's played well this preseason. I think Ladarius Hamilton is his biggest competition. Kobe Jones has done some nice things. He's shown some nice moves, but I don't believe consistently enough to really upend Tipa or Ladarius Hamilton. Tipa, I think, makes the roster because he offers them the most versatility. I think in terms of special teams work, he probably is more prevalent than Ladarius Hamilton. So I think he gets the nod as of now, but this isn't a call I really feel great about. So that leaves on the release list Kobe Jones, Ladarius Hamilton. Like I said, Jones has shown some nice things. Hamilton has been steady, but I think the versatility of Tipa and Garvin's experience and yet to be built upon potential make them the most likely bottom of the depth chart guys. And then that gives you Rashawn and Preston. So all told, 5 outside linebackers: Preston, Rashawn, Garvin, Tipa, and JJ Ngabare. Up next is the cornerbacks, and I have them keeping 6. I think the only question mark here is who is going to be that 6th guy. So starting it off, you've got Eric Stokes, Keshawn Nixon, the new guy from Vegas, Shamar Jean-Charles, Rico Gafford, Rasul Douglas, and then, of course, Jair. As you may have noticed there, I slipped in Rico Gafford as the 6th corner, and he's currently nursing an ankle injury. He was a DNP today for practice. He's missed some other stuff. Ultimately, though, I think early on in camp, he really showed out. I mean, he was impressive in the beginning bit of camp. His speed. I just read earlier this morning that he ran a 4.22. That man is fast. And watching him in the preseason games as the gunner for kickoffs and punters, I think they're going to keep him for that reason alone. He's a converted wide receiver corner. He's throughout his career. In fact, Tom Silverstein just wrote a piece on him this morning about his journey through the NFL and how he's been in for a few years now, predominantly just on practice squads, but constantly bouncing between wide receiver and corner. It was actually LaFleur who went to him early on in the offseason of this year after the Packers had signed him. They signed him as a wide receiver. And LaFleur went to him and said after the draft, hey, we now have a lot of young receivers. I think you've got a better chance sticking at corner. And he began working on corner again. And I think his greatest asset is special teams. But if he can hone the speed with technique at corner, it gives him a project to work on, very much in the vein of Sam Shields. I tweeted earlier in training camp how appropriate it is that Rico Gafford is wearing number 37, Sam Shields' old number. And I think it makes sense for a lot of reasons. I mean, Gafford switching between wide receiver and DB, now just learning DB. I think he's going to stick as 6. The one that I really see giving competition to him is Keandre Thomas. Keandre Thomas has had a standout 2 preseason games. He's done a lot of good work in coverage. He has played some teams. But ultimately, I kind of look at Thomas like an already crafted corner. He's going to be your number 6 corner. He's going to be okay on teams. Gafford, I think you have a lot more potential to work with, and that speed as a gunner could really come in handy. Now, one thing we have not seen yet, because there's been such a lack of tackling, and in the 2 preseason games he hasn't had many opportunities, is Gafford a strong tackler? Because obviously that's a big part of being a gunner on teams. But if that guy can tackle, I think he sticks as number 6. So ultimately that leaves off on your cut list Keandre Thomas and KB and Ento, both of which I think are excellent practice squad candidates again for Ento. I don't know if he's going to stick around for the Packers for practice squad another year. He's a good, sticky prospect. I think he's just the next man out. They've got 8 corners on the roster right now. They got to get it down to 6. I really think this is the way you go. Now, in terms of this group's overall ability, this should be one of the best, if not the best, cornerback rooms in the NFL. Jair and Stokes, both excellent 1s and 2s. And then you've got Rasul, who is the star role right now and playing all over the place. Even in practice today, he was playing some safety, which I'm going to talk about more extensively when I get to the safety portion. This secondary, this cornerback room specifically, should absolutely be one of the strengths of this team, and it has been excellent to see how much swagger they've been playing with, or the preposterous amount of trash that Rasul was talking at Saints practice, as Matt Schneiderman tweeted. So, cornerbacks 1 through 6, very, very, very strong group. I think if Rico Gafford is your 6 as a developmental and teamer, you're doing something right. So, corners, looking great. Moving on to safety. First off at the top, you got Adrian Amos. I mean, Mr. Steady, Mr. Dependable, beginning to kind of start getting the credit that he deserves. Adrian Amos is the leader of the safety room, no doubt about it. One of the most reliable and best safeties in the NFL. Number 2, his starting counterpart, you got Darnell Savage. Savage, when he initially injured his hamstring, there just didn't seem to be a world of concern about it. Similar to a couple of other injuries we've seen, like Mason Crosby, which I'll touch on later. But my guess is that Savage is going to be good to go for week 1, and we're just not going to hear anything or see anything about Savage. It's a hamstring. Why even risk re-aggravation at this point? I think we're going to see him in the prep for week 1, and he can just walk right back in and be that starter with Amos. The depth behind those two, this is where it gets a little bit more touchy. Originally, I had planned to put Vernon Scott in this, but Scott immediately stepped into the number 3 role when Savage was injured. And then today, he was waived with an injury designation, which I was really surprised by. I think that shoulder injury must be more severe in nature to warrant a release. Because again, I mean, he stepped right in for Savage when he was out. So he seemed to have an inside track at that safety 3 job, and now he's just gone. I did see Tom Silverstein tweeted earlier about how the Packers may call him back much later in the season, as rules allow them to. But Vernon Scott, off the roster, so that is 1 cut already there. Tariq Carpenter, the 7th round pick, I don't think he makes it. Devontae Cross, and then I don't think Innis Gaines makes it either, and I think that kind of rounds out our cuts. In terms of who does make the roster, that leaves 5 at this given moment, and that's Adrian Amos, Darnell Savage, Sean Davis, who now is their number 3, I would think pretty much for sure. The new guy, Micah Abernathy, who has balled out as of recent, especially in that preseason game against the Saints. He has continued to make plays in camp. This dude's just a gamer, and I think he's creeping up enough to actually crack this roster, especially given the injury concerns of other guys on the bottom tier of the depth chart with him. Abernathy's not hurt. He's been there every day. He's been making plays. You can't say that for every other safety. And then last, that gives us Dallin Levitt. Now, Levitt, he's a special teams ace, has been for Bisaccia for at least the last 2 years. We know that's why the Packers brought him in, was to be a special teams leader. And then he suffered injuries of his own. My thinking here is that Levitt is going to be included on the initial 53 and then will be put on IR, given some kind of injury designation, which will then allow them to make other roster moves, one of which I'm going to touch on in just a minute. But I think Levitt makes the roster as the initial fifth safety, and that buys them time to then get into the season a few weeks, figure out what they want to do. The only contingency that I'm going to throw on here is I have no idea how severe Levitt's injury is. When it first happened, I know LaFleur said it was going to be a while, but other than that, I haven't seen anything from anyone about just how severe it is, how long he may be out. So partly thinking here, he's going to make the 53 because they like him, they need him for special teams. But then give him some kind of designation that's going to open up another roster spot. So again, that gives you 5: Abernathy, Amos, Davis, Levitt, and Savage. Beyond that, I think that this is overall a strong group. It's a little shaky. I mean, Sean Davis has made some plays for sure. But you got to wonder about coverage here. Is it enough coverage if they use a safety 3 as much as they did last year? Which I don't think they do because of Quay Walker. But if they do, is there then some concern about whether your depth here is really good enough? I think it's at least a valid question in spite of the plays that we've seen made by Abernathy, by Davis, and then obviously you got Savage and Amos. So overall, a very strong group, but like I said, I think Levitt makes it for now before he's given some kind of designation. So I know today was only going to be defense, but I am going to sneak in the specialists here as well. This should be very brief, very easy. I just don't think the specialists need their own video, frankly. So at kicker, we've got Mason Crosby. Yes, the Packers tried out a bunch of different specialists yesterday, very kicker heavy in their workouts, but I'm just not seeing a ton of urgency from the Packers that they're concerned about Crosby missing any regular season time. And even beyond that, Ahmed, their new kicker, has been doing great in camp the last couple of days. So I'm just not sensing this great need that, oh no, Mason's going to miss time, we got to go get somebody else. So I'm still calling Mason Crosby to be there week 1. And then, of course, you have their new punter, Pat O'Donnell, there at number 2. And at long snapper, this is where I'm predicting Gutekunst is going to do a little bit of trickeration. I do not think that Jack Coco is the guy. I know he beat out Steven Wirtle to this point. However, I just haven't seen enough from Coco on a consistent level that he has outright taken this job. I think he's a wonderful story. I think he has shown some signs of progress, especially for not having snapped to a punter in forever. But I still think they go out and get somebody else. So I think this is going to be some initial 53 trickery here by Gutekunst, that the initial 53, the very first one, is not going to include a long snapper. So when we see the initial 53 announcement, I don't think there's going to be a long snapper on there. I think he's going to have someone else on that initial 53 that then he will immediately place on IR and then bring in a different long snapper, hopefully a veteran who's been competent before, which would be such a welcome change, frankly. So I think that's what we got. I think it's going to be Crosby, O'Donnell, and then long snapper to be named later, is I think really what we're getting at here with the specialists. That's it for another episode of Lombardi Time Brews. If you liked what you heard today with this initial roster projection or even yesterday's video, if you haven't watched yesterday's video, go back and check it out. As I said, it's lasted 24 hours and I haven't gotten anything wrong yet. And I'm really thankful for that. So, if you liked what you heard over the last couple of days, hit like, hit share, subscribe. Again, we're available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Overcast, Spotify, and a whole bunch of other podcast services. Just search Lombardi Time Brews. If you need a direct link to any podcast ever, please just reach out to me on Twitter. My handle is @JohnDelray. in addition to posting the podcast links every day, I'll also be posting other thoughts about the team, retweeting from some of the Packers beat writers, the guys who are actually there in it every day, even player tweets sometimes. So please follow me on Twitter. You'll get the direct links to the podcast every day, and really just even additional content besides just what you see in the podcast. So thank you for tuning in today. Been another episode of Lombardi Time Brews. One last reminder, hit like, hit subscribe, hit all the buttons. Just see what happens. Hit them all. And let's build a Packer community together. Thank you so much for checking it out. Have a great day.